Our top story today. This Thursday is the 12th day of national strikes in France against President Macron's unpopular pension reforms. Across the country, there are delays on public transport and some schools are closed as well, in protest at the law which would raise the retirement age to 64. Now, unions say today's industrial action is particularly crucial ahead of a much-awaited decision tomorrow by France's Constitutional Council, which will weigh in on the law's compatibility with the French constitution. Well, the marches today are expected to be largely peaceful, but earlier this afternoon, a group of protesters did storm the headquarters of the luxury goods company LVMH, which owned brands including Louis Vuitton. The images you're looking at there are from the centre of Paris a short while ago. Well, to discuss this moment in French politics, I'm very pleased to be joined on the programme by the political historian Andrew Smith. He's joining us from Queen Mary University in London. Thanks for making time to talk to us today, sir.
Thank you.
What do you make of where this anti-government movement is right now? How strong is it? Do you think it's losing steam?
Well, it's a challenge. As you mentioned, this is the 12th day of mobilisation called by the Intersyndicale. And of course, 12 days since the start of the year means that, of course, it is challenging to maintain that level of commitment, of activism, of people in the streets. Of course, it is building up towards, of course, this huge decision that people are waiting on tomorrow from the Constitutional Court around, of course, the constitutionality of the pension reform, but also ruling on whether or not there should be one of these shared initiative referendums offered on it as well. So I think it is a challenge, and it is something that is definitely affecting people, right across France. Of course, we can see this the manifestations are stronger in the West. We can see really it's places that put people like Mélenchon at the front. It is very much grounded in the strength of the left and the unions, but it is a much broader movement than that. We've seen today, big protests in Toulouse, Rennes, Marseille, right across France. And I think it's quite important that we don't see this as being something which is just Paris, just the left, or anything like that. This is a broad social movement, which has its foundations in those activist structures, I think.
And obviously, Andrew, we don't know what the Constitutional Council will rule tomorrow, but let's assume, first of all, it rules in the president's favour. This law then passes. What do you think happens next? Not just in terms of the political mechanism, but for the president himself. He's still a deeply unpopular figure. He certainly will be if this pension reform becomes law. So will Macron change his style, do you think? Will he change his method of governing, or will it be much of the same either way?
Well, it's a real challenge already. We've seen some, reports coming out from Macron during his visits, first to China, then to the Netherlands, speaking to journalists and talking about, what happens next. He said he will meet partners from social institutions after the Constitutional Court's ruling in order to work out the way forward. Of course, we know we can, listen to the statements from the heads of the unions. Of course, Sophie Binet, now in the CGT, has said really that they're hoping that the ruling for the referendum will come through. Laurent Berger from the CFDT still, pushing this idea that Emmanuel Macron cannot govern like this. The country cannot move forward if it's paralysed in this way. And of course, for the unions, we are approaching, we are in April, we are approaching May Day. And so they're hoping that even if, this kind of attrition of these constant days of mobilisation, starts to bear, then the 1st of May provides a big moment to recharge that and bring people out onto the streets. But even in Parliament, I think we can see moments where, Macron has vulnerabilities on the flanks. We've already seen today some of the deputies kind of tied to Renaissance, but not part of it, from the En Commun group, including Barbara Pompili, who's the former minister for the ecological transition, and they've started to sort of soften their alliance to the Renaissance grouping. We've also seen people like, of course, the former IMF head and socialist grandee Dominique Strauss-Kahn, of course, with his own political troubles in the past, come out and criticise Macron over the errors he's made as part of this. So I think there is a sense that he's weak on that kind of centre-left of his coalition, and he will struggle really to put further reforms through the assembly like this. So I think that idea of reconciliation, which he's hinted at, is going to be absolutely crucial. And of course, we could well see that the Constitutional Council says there are elements that might need to be reformed, that there are things, it might be a reserved judgment. Part of this is constitutional, but maybe some of the legislative riders, as they're called, need to be struck down. And that might well bring a negotiation to the president, or well, to the prime minister, effectively, but to the prime minister, on a technicality, and because some element of the reform is struck down in that way. So it really will depend what we hear tomorrow from this constitutional court, I think.
And Andrew, you're talking about political consensus there, but there was polling here in France out last week that suggested that should there be an election right now, it is the far right, Marine Le Pen, that would win. I wonder why you think the far right is apparently gaining strength right now, and whether you do link that to this protest movement and all the unrest over pension reforms that's been generated.
Well, I think right now one of the great dangers is the way that the Rassemblement National are playing this. In the presidential election, I think people joked at times that Marine Le Pen seemed to, sort of win popularity by staying out of the media, especially when, Russia invaded Ukraine. And suddenly there was this focus on the ties between the Rassemblement National and Putin, for example. And actually, I think there she sort of stepped back and stayed out of the limelight. And here again, I think there's a difficulty, that kind of submarine Le Pen tactic, where actually the Rassemblement National is sort of, quite enjoying the role of being in opposition, but not necessarily supporting all of the manifestations that are happening in the street. They can criticise government, they can criticise the worst excesses, without offering any constructive element towards actually resolving the problem. And so I think there's a real danger that right now what the Rassemblement National are doing is enjoying this role of opposition and actually capitalising on the left's activism and the centre's unpopularity as a result of their ties to this reform. So I think there is a real danger there, that one of the people that win out of this political impasse, this lack of political consensus, may well be a strengthening of some of those figures who are able to try and play both sides, like the Rassemblement National. A constant danger, I think, within this moment. Like you say, reinforced by the sense that, if they were to have an election right now, they would see some element of increased popularity. Of course, we won't have an election right now. That isn't something that's going to happen right at this very moment. But it is certainly a warning sign, I think, that there needs to be more conciliation. There needs to be more constructive dialogue. And we cannot see a country governed as a result of complete political impasse. There needs to be some give, I think, on both sides.
Andrew Smith, as always, thanks very much indeed, sir, for your time and your analysis today.